Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Lee Crowley. He is the founder and managing director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. The Macdonald-Laurier Institute is an independent and nonpartisan think tank based in Ottawa. He is also an author. His most recent book is Gardeners versus Designers, Understanding the Great Fault Line in Canadian Politics. Today, however, we're going to be talking about the Conservative Party and the Conservative Party's leadership process right now, where they're going through looking for a new leader. And Brian, I think, is going to be an excellent person to chat with about what the Conservatives need to do to ensure that they elect the leader that is the right person to lead the Tory Party going forward. He's written a series of 6 op-ed articles for the National Post, and in these series, he tackled the following issues: why the Tories need to put country before party, and what the role of an official opposition is in our parliamentary democracy. Why they have to be the party of opportunity rather than the party of redistribution, etc. And we're going to go through these in a little bit more detail. Brian Lee Crowley, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Brian, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation.
My pleasure. I've had the pleasure of interviewing several people from Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and if you're the founder and managing director, it's going to be a real honor to interview you today, sir. So thank you for this. So what prompted you to write 6 op-ed articles for the National Post? That's a fairly significant commitment of time and energy.
Yeah, well, look, I think that, a parliamentary democracy like Canada's depends on the existence of several political parties that can accept the responsibility of forming the government. And I think that Canada has suffered over the last few years from not having exactly that. A couple of parties that the electorate as a whole regard as serious contenders for power. In a system like ours, which is not really an ideological system, it's a system that's based on the idea that power is given to a political party. We hold the people who exercise power accountable. And one of the key elements in holding that governing party accountable is the existence of an alternative government that the electorate can turn to if they're dissatisfied with how government is being conducted.
And so you don't think the Conservative Party in the past couple of years, or the NDP party, or the Bloc Québécois have set themselves up as a ready for government party?
Well, I think that the Conservatives in particular have always been the alternative government to the Liberals in our system. The NDP and the other parties have never really come close to being able to achieve power, but the Conservatives have always been that key opposition party that was the alternative government in waiting. And I think that the fact of the matter is that even though the Tories got slightly more votes in both of the last 2 elections, they've been unable to crack in any significant way the large pool of seats in Ontario and Quebec, particularly concentrated around Toronto and Montreal. And unless they're able to do that, in my view, they will not be able to form the government. And that means that it's very hard for the electorate to hold the Liberals accountable for their exercise of power.
So Brian Mulroney, former Conservative Prime Minister, was able to do that because he had a large number of seats in Quebec. But given the Bloc Québécois, is that ever possible again? And Stephen Harper did it because he had a far wider tent than it would appear the current Conservative Party has, and he was able to elect numerous different members in suburban Toronto. So
yes.
What of the current Conservative Party done wrong such that they have not been able to crack suburban Toronto, I think, is the biggest issue?
Yeah, I think it's primarily an interest. It's primarily an issue of trust. I think that there's a significant part of the Canadian population who do not trust the Conservative Party as it's currently constituted with political power. Now, you've quite rightly said that Brian Mulroney and Stephen Harper both were able to forge coalitions which brought the Conservatives to power. It's not something that can't be done. But, if we take Stephen Harper, for example, Stephen Harper was able to take the strength of the Conservative Party in the West and meld it together with particularly new Canadians in suburban ridings around Toronto, and to create a governing coalition that had never been seen before in Canada. It was quite new. Since that coalition fell apart, the Conservatives have been unable to build on their strength in the West to extend into the rest of the country. They still obviously do quite well in rural Ontario, but that famous 905 belt around Toronto has been quite resistant to the Tories. And the reason that I wrote my series of op-eds was to explore a little bit how the Tories might connect with these other parts of Canada, these other parts of the electorate that they've failed to connect with in the last 3 elections.
And so what's the response been to your series of op-eds?
It's been very good. In fact, I think there's a lot of people out there who are small C conservatives, if I can put it that way, who nevertheless do not recognize themselves in the large C Conservative Party as it's currently constituted and as it has been led by the last 2 leaders. And there is, in my view, a hunger out there for precisely that serious alternative government, which has been lacking in the last 2 elections. And a lot of people have contacted me to say, that I've helped them to crystallize their own thinking about what they would need to see in an opposition party in order to feel that they could give them their confidence in an election.
I wonder whether they're listening, though, because right now, when I look at Jean Charest and Pierre Poilievre, the 2 leading candidates for the Conservative Party, it's an unbelievable amount of infighting where, one is saying that because of his support of the truckers' convoy, he's disqualified from being a leader and passing laws because he doesn't follow the laws. And the other one is saying he's disqualified because he was a Liberal Premier of Quebec, and so therefore he's not truly a Conservative, even though there wasn't a Conservative Party in Quebec at the time. So, are they listening to you?
Well, not yet. I think part of what's going on is that the Conservative Party, and this has been the problem, I think, that has landed them with 2 leaders who weren't saleable nationally. They are unable to get beyond their own ideological preoccupations, their own narrow policy interests, their own infighting, and to think about the country as a whole. And this is why the very first piece in my series was about how the Conservatives have a responsibility to the country to offer an alternative that Canadians can vote for. They are letting down the country if they are solely preoccupied with their own internal battles, with their own ideological disputes, and don't think about what Canadians want from that alternative government, which is so essential to a parliamentary democracy.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, but I just can't see how what you've described we need for the Conservative Party can coexist in a situation where you've got the 2 frontrunners and frankly, Patrick Brown, probably someone that's near the front running, criticizing each other so vehemently and saying they're actually disqualified. Not that, I think I'm better or I've got better policies, but that my opponent disqualifies himself from being a leader because he supported the truck convoy in one case, or because he was a Quebec Liberal leader and Liberal Premier in the other case, or he was too moderate when speaking about Patrick Brown in the third case. Anyway, we're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Brian Lee Crowley, the Managing Director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and his thinking about what the Conservative Party needs to do to put themselves forward as a true alternative governing party in Canada. In just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Our topic tonight is the Conservative Party and what they need to do to put themselves forward as a true alternative governing party in Canada. Our guest is Brian Lee Crowley, who is the Managing Director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. He has just got an unbelievable resume. Let me tell you a little bit about him for a second, if I could. He is the founder of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Ottawa's top-ranked independent and nonpartisan national public policy think tank. He's also the Clifford Clark visiting economist at Finance Canada, the founder of the country's leading regional think tank, the Atlantic Institute of Market Studies, and is a member of the editorial board of the Globe and Mail previously. He has always pursued one vision consistently and relentlessly to make Canada the best governed country in the world. He's written recently a 6-series op-ed series for the National Post on what the Conservatives need to do, and he's here tonight to talk a little bit about it. Brian, let me ask you about the last comment that you made in regards to what the Conservative Party needs to put forward as an alternative government, and I really think that as I take a look at it, you've got Pierre Poilievre, who's gathering huge crowds across the country that have been described by some people as almost comparable to what Maxime Bernier was attracting in the prior election. But these are primarily people that have never voted before, and a lot of them have been described as people that supported the truck convoy. And there were 10-15% of the Canadian population that was anti-vaccination, anti-mask, supportive of the truckers' convoy. So it's a significant minority of the Canadian population, but it's a significant minority of the Canadian population. It's almost like a populist Trump-like version of the Republican Party into Canada. Is that the right strategy, given what you're saying is that you have to, you have to appeal to all Canadians and suburban Canadians? Like, is that the right strategy? It appears to be right now.
Well, it's certainly working for Pierre. If you look at it solely in terms of, is he getting the most support from card-carrying Conservatives? Because they're the ones who vote in an election for party leader. My own view, for what it's worth, is that Pierre is very successfully tapping into a deep vein of anger and frustration, which I think manifested itself, amongst other things, in the trucker convoy. And if you look at the public policy polling, I think the cleverest pollsters have been asking questions like, well, okay, even if you didn't always agree with everything the truck convoy did you agree that they had, reason to be upset about the lockdown and mask mandates and so on? And actually, a majority of Canadians say, yeah, there was something to it. We didn't like, it went on too long. They made a lot of trouble in Ottawa. We didn't like that part of it. But so there's a big, I think, vein of frustration and anger that can be tapped into. My view, though, is that frustration and anger is not a government program. You can't run a government based on frustration and anger. You might be able to get people to listen to you if you recognize that they had legitimate reason to be angry, and then say, okay, now if we wanted to move beyond anger, how would we create a program that the Conservative Party could put into place that would attract the support of Canadians across the country? That, I think, no candidate for the leadership of the Conservative Party has yet done. And you talked about populism. Let's talk for just a second about populism, because I think that populism per se, is just the idea that political elites should listen to the concerns of the population. The current government is trying to turn it into a bit of a dirty concept, a swear word in political terms, because they want to, as you rightly said, they want to kind of attach it to Donald Trump, populism in the United States, that wave of anger that washed across the United States. I have to say that I think that we have to separate out those political leaders who trade in anger and who simply want to enrage the population and use that energy to achieve political power, compared to those people who say, okay, I understand you're angry. I don't dismiss your anger, but I want to find reasoned solutions to the things that have made you so upset. And I think that's a perfectly legitimate political position to occupy. And I think a conservative leader that knew how to do that would do quite well.
Let me challenge you, if I could, about this politics of anger for a second. You know, in 2016, 2015, 2016, Donald Trump won. A lot of people would suggest in the Rust Belt what was it called, the blue wall of middle America states, because of anger, because of frustration, and you know, people would have described it, and there were lots of pundits that were saying this was the middle-aged white former factory worker that was out of work, or even if he had work, he wasn't making as much money as he was making in the past, and he saw the cultural elites in the coasts making a substantial more money, and he felt forgotten, and he felt that America needed to be made great again, and so anger worked, and anger worked for 4 years, and came close to working again in the last federal election in the United States. So, and this is a sample of one trip from Toronto to Ottawa this past weekend, and maybe a dozen cars, so it's not a great sample size. But you know, I drove by 12 cars, I counted them, that were waving Canadian flags, and every single one of those cars waving a Canadian flag, every single one of them waving a Canadian flag, had a blank Trudeau bumper sticker on it, and that wasn't a nice word in the blank. And I've talked to people that say that the Canadian flag is it's taken on a new image. The Canadian flag, because the truckers' convoy, means blank Trudeau, means anti-vax. The Canadian flag doesn't have the image that it used to have. But that's anger, isn't it? That's an incredible anger to say that about your prime minister in such, ugly terms, and be able to, shout it from the rooftops or shout it from the tops of trucks. That's anger, and isn't that some of this populism that Pierre Poilievre is accessing?
Well, you have to ask yourself, what makes people so angry? See, I think that's the key to thinking about this. And if we go back to the American example, I think that what made people just absolutely livid in the United States, it wasn't just the fact that, free trade, seemed to be connected with the loss of, well-paying unionized jobs in lots of manufacturing plants, and the deindustrialization of the Rust Belt and all the other things that we know about. It wasn't just that. It was that when people said, I'm actually upset about this and I'm looking to my political leaders to do something about it, what they got back was, well, you're a basket of deplorables. What was it Obama said? They're just clinging to their guns and religion. The reaction of the elites was, why would we listen to these people? They're not as smart as we are. They are upset about things that they should accept. And when they raise it, we're simply going to dismiss them as the great unwashed. And, I'm sorry to say that I think a lot of that has come to Canada. When the Prime Minister says, look, these people who are my opponents are a fringe minority with unacceptable views, he's doing exactly what the elites in the United States did, which made people so angry because they felt their legitimate preoccupations were being dismissed by those in power.
So if Prime Minister Trudeau had gone out and actually spoken to and listened to some of the truck convoy, we may not have this anger. We may not have this situation.
Well, yes, I mean, the truck convoy is only a manifestation of a larger issue, but I certainly think that the Prime Minister showed nothing but contempt for the trucker convoy from the very beginning. And I know people who were, in senior positions in the government of Canada, and as soon as the truck convoy left Vancouver and started to sort of gather steam across the country, they were completely freaked out. They reflected the attitudes of the cabinet in Ottawa, which was that this was an attack on what they think Canada is all about. I thought that they actually drove people who were supportive of the convoy into paroxysms of anger for no good reason other than to achieve, short-term political advantage for the Liberal Party. I actually was quite scandalized by the way the government handled the trucker convoy. You don't have to agree with the convoy. The whole point is that when you're the government of an entire country, you don't get to consult only your own political feelings and priorities. You're the government of everybody. And when you take particular parts of the population and treat them as pariahs whose opinions are of no consequence and indeed are to be dismissed as not only unacceptable, but evil, which was basically the attitude that I thought the government was projecting from Ottawa, you shouldn't be surprised when people get angry.
It's interesting because Toronto, Montreal, Quebec City, elsewhere had similar truck convoys and protests arrive, and they didn't sit down and listen. They just didn't allow them to stay. And they said, you have every right to come and protest as an individual, but you don't have a right to bring a truck into Queen's Park Circle. And Washington, there were truck convoys that were circling in the ring roads around Washington, D.C. for I think it was several weeks, but they never allowed them to get off the ring roads and come into the center of the city. And so they weren't doing what you're saying in listening. At least I don't think they were. They were actually being tougher and not even allowing them to take root. So what's the lesson?
Yeah, well, look, if you're asking me, do I think that authorities in Ottawa handled the truck convoy in an intelligent way, regardless of what they thought about the merits of the truckers' case? I completely agree that the police and the municipal authorities and the OPP just messed it up royally. And all they needed to do was close a few exits off the highway, and the truck convoy would have continued through. They probably would have parked in some field outside Ottawa. The temperature of the whole thing would have been considerably reduced. But that's a different issue from, remember that I think the truck convoy is only a manifestation of a larger problem, which is that there are large segments of the Canadian population who I think are extremely frustrated. They feel that blue collar workers have paid a far greater price, for example, than white collar workers over the lockdowns and the other restrictions that were brought in under COVID. There are the people who work in the oil patch, and that's not limited to Alberta, by the way. People benefit from the oil patch all across the country in various forms. These are people who feel that their livelihood has been called into question, and political authorities are sort of blithely dismissing their concerns as of no real consequence. And this is a recipe for political division and anger.
You did another column on the Conservative Party needs to be the party of opportunity rather than redistribution. What do you mean by that?
Well, if there are going to be two alternative parties, they have to be based on, demonstrable differences of approach. And clearly, I think the government of Justin Trudeau, rightly or wrongly, had been a government of big spending. I mean, you cannot believe how much more money the government of Canada is spending today than it was just 6 or 7 years ago when Justin Trudeau came into power. And the level of redistribution has gone up enormously. An alternative approach, which said, well, actually, the role of government is not primarily to redistribute. There's obviously has to be some redistribution, but the role of government is to create opportunities so that the energy of Canadians can be employed creating jobs, creating businesses, innovating, trading, doing all the things that create wealth in Canada. If you turn the Conservatives into the party of opportunity, of wealth creation, of jobs, then you have a very serious alternative approach compared to the Liberals. And I think it's one that appeals to a very large segment of the Canadian population. And back to our, overriding theme of our conversation today, it's a positive approach. It's one that builds on things that resonate with Canadians who, I believe, want to be responsible for themselves. They want to be contributing members of society. They want to be able to look after their family. And the argument I made was that the Conservatives should be a party committed to the idea that we can double the size of the Canadian economy within a very short period of time. And if we did that, Canadians would, be earning $17,000 a year more each. The value of our work would go up enormously. We'd be trading more. All the things that bring prosperity to Canada are the things that I think the Conservative Party needs to identify itself with.
Numerous different, Toronto-based CEOs have talked about a productivity or an innovation agenda recently as well. How do you get that kind of productivity that you can double the GDP of Canada? Well,
actually, it wouldn't take all that much more economic growth than we've already got. If we increased our economic growth rate by just 0.5 percentage point every year, year after year, what that does is it very quickly results in the economy growing very fast. And for example, and I wrote an article in this series about the environment and climate change, so no doubt we'll talk about that. But think about the fact that our single most valuable export is oil and gas. It's more valuable than anything else, cars, you name it. And the United States at the moment is begging places like Saudi Arabia to increase their oil production because America is short of energy.
We still haven't approved our pipelines.
Well, exactly. When the new American ambassador came to Canada representing the Biden administration, he pulled together a little conference call that I participated in. And he said, there were heads of various think tanks and so on. And he said, I'm so proud to be here representing the administration that, stopped the Keystone XL pipeline. And I said, well, Ambassador, just remember that at a time when you guys were stopping Keystone XL, you were building pipelines in the United States like nobody's business. You're increasing your oil production. The only pipeline you don't like is one with Canadian oil in it. Biden is now coming to Canada and saying, please, please, please send us more of your oil. Just don't ask us to approve Keystone XL. Send it by train, which is a vastly inferior way of transporting oil compared to pipelines. Pipelines are much safer. The fact that Biden won't reverse course and approve, Keystone XL or something similar is he's just boxed himself into a political corner that he can't get out of. But that's not going to help Americans solve their energy supply problem.
We're chatting tonight with Brian Lee Crowley. He's the managing director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. We're talking about his 6-part series that he wrote for the National Post about what the Conservative Party needs to do during this current leadership campaign. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Mr. Crowley in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a really interesting conversation tonight with the managing director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, the founder of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, a nonpartisan think tank in Ottawa. His name is Brian Lee Crowley. He's written a 6-part series for the National Post on the Conservative Party and what it needs to do coming up to choosing a new leader. One of the other things that you talked about, as you just mentioned previously, was that the Conservative Party needs to have a reasonable policy on climate change. And I interviewed just a couple of weeks ago someone that was leader of the Conservative Clean Growth Committee or something like that. And they were trying to put together a policy saying that we needed to have a justifiable position on the environment. Why do you think the Conservative Party needs to accept climate change and have a justifiable position on climate change?
Well, I think the Conservatives get into trouble because, they look at the way the left in Canada deals with climate change. And, the left has got their hair set on fire on climate change. It's the end of the world. It's a climate emergency. It's this, it's that, it's the other thing. And the Conservatives say, well, that seems a little over the top. I completely agree. I think it's completely over the top. Does that mean that you can't have an intelligent policy about climate change? I think that's crazy. You see, people look at the scientific community, for example, and they see, I'm not going to talk about scientific consensus because I actually don't believe in consensus in science. Science isn't about consensus. Science is about an incremental effort to improve our level of knowledge about the natural world by experimentation. We don't know the outcome of experimentation. That's the whole point. That's why it's called experimentation. But the point is that we have a large body of scientific knowledge in the world of scientists themselves saying, look, we think that climate change is a real problem. There's serious scientific evidence that something that mankind or humankind needs to come to grips with. And I think that, one of the problems the Conservatives have is if they put out the idea that they don't actually agree when such a large number of scientists are saying, look, this is a serious problem. It begins to look like the party is anti-science, doesn't take these things seriously. And I got to tell you, you're never going to win an election by making the voters feel they have to be stupid in order to vote for you. You have to make them feel smart voting for you. Okay, so it seems to me that the Conservatives need to say, look, we hear all these smart people, all these people in the scientific community who are saying this is a real problem. We agree. Okay. Do we have to think that life on Earth is coming to an end tomorrow? No. Do we have to take this seriously as something that the scientific community is bringing to us and a problem that needs to be dealt with? Yes. And one of the things I said in my piece about this issue was that, the Conservatives have managed to maneuver themselves into a position where they can't ever say anything nice about a carbon tax. Whereas, my view is that if you're a real small c Conservative, you believe in the power of incentives. You believe not in telling people how to live, but you believe in giving them some guidance about what the smart thing is to do. And this is exactly what a carbon tax does. A carbon tax simply increases the cost of using carbon and gives you an incentive to try and find some way to do it, to achieve what you want without using so much carbon. That's a perfect small c Conservative approach to the issue of climate change. You don't need to do a lot of the other things that the government of the day wants to tell you. We're going to tax your pickup truck to death, and we're going to obstruct pipelines, and we do all these other things. Those are not climate change policies. Those are political policies for political advantage. If the Conservatives want to be taken seriously as a party that appeals to the population as a whole, they have to have something to say about climate change. They have to show that they take it seriously. And I think a smarter carbon tax than the one we've got is the way to go.
In the last election, Aaron O'Toole did support a carbon tax, and that was one of the things that I think surprised Conservative Party members more than anything else. And I may have my facts or memory wrong, but just in a Conservative Party policy conference just prior to the election, they voted a resolution against carbon taxes. And then right after that, Aaron O'Toole announced a new policy for carbon taxes. And one of the complaints a lot of people had during the campaign was, how could you have a flip-flop like that? And do you believe the Conservative Party and the leader of the Conservative Party when he's saying something so diametrically opposed with what the party said? How do you actually get the Conservative Party to agree with a carbon tax?
Well, I think part of what needs to happen is, uh, you know, the case I'm laying out in this series of articles is how the Conservative Party can appeal to a larger share of the Canadian population than its current base. I think part of the problem for the Conservatives right now is anybody who can win the leadership of the party isn't acceptable to a broader Canadian public opinion. And someone who is acceptable to that broader opinion can never win the leadership. And I'm trying to suggest that the party needs to wrestle with that issue. And the only way that they can become a Conservative party capable of forming a national government is to think not just about their own, the people who currently support the party and the way they think about issues, but how you can expand the appeal of the party beyond that base. If they can't do that, it doesn't, in my view, really matter very much who the leader is that they elect. They will not be able to, sell the party's approach to enough Canadians that they'll be able to form a government. So my argument here is not how do you sell this to Conservatives who are already there. My argument is you need to expand the number of people who think of themselves as Conservatives. And you can only do that by broadening the appeal of the party, by addressing issues that the current base is not willing to address.
So one of your other issues, I thought, spoke to this dramatically, potentially, particularly in the current environment of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You talk about national security, and that national security is a domestic issue. And you've now got the Liberals actually ordering the planes that Harper had recommended, what was it, 15 years ago or something like that. Go back to the Conservative Party used to be for maybe the truck convoy, the party of law and order. And so law and order, national security, strong defense seems like perfect Conservative Party policies. What do you think the Conservative Party should be doing? Should the Conservative Party be saying 2% GDP we're going to spend on national defense, that we're going to strengthen our army, that we're going to order submarines and frigates and jets, et cetera?
Well, so, let's go back before we get into the specifics of national security. Let's think about, how a Conservative Party, and this is true of Conservative parties throughout the Western democracies, how does a Conservative Party put together a governing coalition? It's by bringing together, in my view, three groups. You bring together fiscal and economic Conservatives, people who believe in economic growth. That's the opportunity agenda that we talked about. And I also talked about how you control government spending and, get rid of deficits and all of those are important things. Those appeal to a lot of small C Conservative people. Second is you have to have national security Conservatives, people who believe in, the very job one for government of any country is to protect the people in that country from foreign and domestic threats. If you can't keep Canadians safe, the rest of what you do doesn't matter very much. And we have allowed, I think, Canada's ability to protect itself and project its values abroad, we've allowed that to decline precipitously. And I don't blame that solely on the Liberals. I think the Conservatives who've been in government in the last 10, 15 years or so also bear responsibility here. The argument that I made is that Canada lives in an increasingly dangerous world. We only have to think about the fact that 6 months ago, people were still saying Russia will never invade Ukraine. That's crazy, that we don't do that anymore. Military might doesn't matter. Well, I think that the Ukrainians will tell you that military might matters a heck of a lot. And they're in the position they're in because Russia has superior military might to them, and they are finding it very hard to repel the Russian invasion. They're doing it primarily with their courage rather than their military means. And of course, we know that China has great ambitions to become a dominant power in the world. They've been using their increasing military and economic might to, basically crush democracy in Hong Kong, to establish their power in the South China Sea, to build the Belt and Road Initiative across the world. Canada is way behind the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, and many of our other allies in understanding that we inhabit a far more dangerous world than we thought we inhabited even just a year or two ago. And so Canada needs, I think, if it wants to be taken seriously on the world stage, it needs to be able to contribute something to solving these problems. And I think that means being clear-eyed about the threat that China represents to liberal democratic values and the liberal democratic order that Canada has contributed so much to creating. Canada needs to be able to contribute more to NATO and to other democracies that face threats from places like Russia and China. And Canada needs to be able to protect its own backyard, as in the case of the Arctic, where Russia has been investing heavily in economic and military development of the Arctic. And Canada has been talking for years about the creation of a naval station in the Arctic, which we still haven't seen hide nor hair of. So yes, Canada needs to get up to spending the 2% that it's already promised to spend, 2% of GDP on its defense. I think we need to be able to specialize in certain things. That would include Arctic defense. I think, we might want to, in addition to the fighter planes, we might want to get into cybersecurity. I think, our young people are extremely well educated and able to help Canada put together a force that can resist cyber attacks on Canada and other Western democracies. There's a whole series of things that Canada needs to do, and we've allowed our ability to defend ourselves to decline in a really scandalous way.
I've interviewed one of your principals, Marcus Kolga,
Yes.
who before everyone knew that Russia was going to attack, was predicting Russia was going to attack on my show, and he has said on my show that he firmly believes Putin is going to go after Ukraine somewhere else, whether it be Romania, Georgia, Moldova, former parts of the Soviet Union, or potentially to Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, some of the Baltic states. If he's right that Ukraine is not where Putin finishes his expansive strategy, should we be dramatically increasing the size of the Canadian Army? Should we be dramatically increasing our deployment in Eastern Europe?
Well, just on the issue of Russia's behavior, remember that Ukraine is not the beginning of Russia's aggressive expansion outside its own borders. It's only the continuation of a policy that they began in Georgia, that they began in Crimea, that they began in Belarus, Moldova, et cetera, et cetera. So, this is a continuation of a Russian expansionism, which I think is very worrisome. And I completely agree with Marcus that there's no reason to think that Russia will stop with Ukraine. Now, they've had a bit of a bloody nose in Ukraine, but I think that Putin is in a position where he needs to shore up his position at home. And one of the easiest ways for him to do that is to engage in, nationalistic saber rattling abroad. So Canada's already, as in Latvia, we lead the Nato mission in Latvia. The Nato mission, by the way, that was created precisely to reassure members of Nato that should Russia engage in the kind of aggressive expansionism that you're talking about, that NATO would be there for those members. And we can already see that longtime neutral countries like Finland and Sweden are knocking at the door of NATO because they know that Russia has got designs on expanding their power and influence abroad, and they are right on the edge of where Russia would expand its presence if they could. So Canada has always been a country that contributed to the collective security of the West. Why? Because we're a small country, and we know that acting alone, we would never be able to face up to superpowers like Russia or China and so on. And we know that by putting our efforts together with our liberal democratic allies, we are able to see off threats like Russia and China. And, we can see in the Indo-Pacific that while we don't have an organization like NATO, something is evolving to fill that need. You've got the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom starting to come together. They've made an agreement on supplying submarines to Australia. There's a lot of talk about Japan wanting to join that. You've got India now joining the Quad, which brings together the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, talking about the collective security issues in the Indo-Pacific. And Canada has nothing to add to those discussions because we have nothing to contribute to make them effective. And that's why Canada, in spite of our long history of supporting liberal democracies banding together to defend themselves against autocracies and bullies like Russia and China, we're no longer invited to the table because we have nothing to contribute.
We're chatting tonight with Brian Lee Crowley, who is the managing director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, the founder of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. We're talking about 6 different op-eds he wrote for the National Post about what the Conservative Party needs to do if it wants to be the true governing party alternative in Canada. We're going to take a break for some final messages and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga Night 60. Our guest tonight is Brian Lee Crowley. He is a founder and managing director of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa. It's a nonpartisan think tank. He's written 6 op-ed articles for the National Post about the Conservative Party and what it needs to do if it's going to be thought of as the true alternative governing party in Canada. Brian, I want to come back to your comment about the economy and the focus on the economy and fiscal issues. In the 2019 campaign, I was on a show and I remember commenting that Andrew Scheer, the leader of the Conservative Party at the time, hardly said a thing about the economy and fiscal issues. The only person on the leaders' debate at that point in time that was talking about fiscal issues was actually Maxime Bernier, who was very focused on those issues. He talked about guns. He talked about racial issues. He talked about immigration. He didn't talk about abortion, but lots of people forced him into addressing the abortion issues. It was almost as if it was completely a social conservative and sort of these extraneous issues like guns that were the topic of concern. And I remember on the show saying, these just aren't important issues to the 905. Yeah. And at that time, the Conservatives had held almost every seat in the 905, and they lost every seat but one in Peel, and lost most of the seats in York and Durham and Halton, and 2.5 years later or whatever it was, in 2021, they lost the rest of the seats. They lost the Minister of Transportation, Lisa Raitt, who went down to defeat in Halton, which was shocking to me. How come the Conservative Party isn't more focused on the issues that it should be focused on from an economy, from an opportunity, as you well pointed out in your op-ed? Why do they keep on having these ideological right-wing social conservatives that control the agenda, it would appear?
Yeah, it's a very difficult issue for the party. I mentioned a moment ago that successful conservative parties bring together 3 kinds of conservative. They bring together fiscal and economic conservatives, national security conservatives, and social conservatives, people who are concerned, say, about the family. Now, you know, I think one of the issues for the Conservative Party is they have not been able to achieve a balance between those three kinds of conservatism. You know, I understand that, you know, part of the Conservative base is energized by the focus on, you know, these narrow social conservative issues. But I think it's part of what's keeping the Conservatives from political power. And, you know, I thought that Stephen Harper was very good at managing those three elements of the party and giving each one of them a little bit without letting them feel that they were dominating the agenda in the party. And I think this is one of the issues for the Conservative Party with you know, their current base and their current way of selecting a leader. It gives way too much power, in my view, to people who are focused on too narrow a range of issues. And this is why they can't break out into thinking as successful small c conservative parties throughout the Western world have learned to do in the last 20 years.
So if you had to sort of describe the perfect leader, what would the traits of the perfect leader be for the Conservative Party?
This is somebody who has a positive agenda. This is not about anger. It's not about all the terrible things that you think the government has done to you. You know, the Conservative base is already angry. What we need to do is, you know, we need to be able to have a Conservative Party that can speak to a larger share of the Canadian population, talking about a positive agenda of economic growth, security for families, safety for Canada, and does so in a way that makes Canadians feel that this message is coming from a place of respect for Canadians and indeed love for Canada. I actually think that one of the weaknesses of the current government is that they seem to be very focused on what they think is wrong with Canada, and they don't have very much to say about what they like about Canada. I think a Conservative leader that was able to put out a positive, patriotic message about how good Canada is, about how it's the envy of the world, about the strengths of Canadian society and the institutions that we built, and building on that base to you know, begin to fix some of the problems that quite rightly we're wrestling with today, like reconciliation with Indigenous people. So, you know, the winning Conservative leader is one who's not going to be angry, but one who's going to be positive about Canada and positive about the contribution that individual Canadians can make to their own communities, to their families, and to making Canada a better place. That's the only way that I can see Conservatives pulling it off.
I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I really want to thank you, Brian Lee Crowley, for joining us from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I agree with you completely in regards to what the Conservative Party needs to do. I think it needs to elect a leader that can win the country rather than just the party. One of the topics that we didn't get into, which maybe we'll do at some other time, is I think that the mechanism of the way that we elect leaders in Canada is part of the problem, is that it's a small group of people that end up having to take out a membership and have to have a confusing process of where they actually elect the leader. And I think that the primary system in the United States, where both declared Democrats or Republicans as well as independents get to vote in a primary system that is, you know, across the whole country, you get a far better judgment as to who the potential leader should be, rather than this small narrow base that ends up making it on smaller ideological issues. And I also think that, and this may be unfair, but I think that the Liberal Party learned your lesson with Stéphane Dion, Michael Ignatieff, and Bob Rae, because they were appealing to small groups within the Liberal Party that were probably, in Stéphane Dion's case, too only climate change oriented, and the Green Shift. In Bob Rae's case, the NDP or the left wing that would never, well, the whole country would never vote for Bob Rae because of his NDP premiership of Ontario. And Michael Ignatieff, who I thought was the smartest guy I've met, but he was too smart for a lot of people and too intellectual, and so therefore didn't connect with the regular person. The Liberal Party learned that lesson. I don't think the Conservative Party has. And with Preston Manning with the Ontario Party, with the Blue Party, with the Maverick Party, with the PCP. They keep on having these splinter groups that end up appealing to even smaller bases and destroy the big tent that the Conservative Party could and should be and was the party of Diefenbaker and of Harper and probably of MacDonald. And someone reminded me, you probably know this, but wasn't it a Liberal Conservative Party that actually founded Canada? Wasn't MacDonald?
Yes,
Prime Minister
Sir Johnny
later?
MacDonald was the leader of the Liberal Conservative Party. Absolutely.
I think there's a lesson there. Anyway, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. I really appreciate it. That's our show for tonight. I remind you, everybody, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Ottawa, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos are available on briancrombie.com. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Brian Lee Crowley, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Brian.